pretty hectic schedule.
Yeah. But it
Or
was interesting. Pardon?
yeah, for relaxing.
Oh, there was nothing relaxing about it. It was total adrenaline for the entire trip.
Mm.
And so we are online now and on the internet, on YouTube. I have to figure out where all of you folks are now. That. Goodness gracious, what's going on here? Okay, so Jordan Hoggard is not going to be with us tonight because today is tax day.
Yeah.
And at the last minute, he discovered that his electronic tax filing was rejected. And so he was running around. He didn't have a printer. And he was running around getting a printer so he could print out his tax returns and get his returns in the mail before midnight tonight. So that's where we are. And so Gilda, I will, as we talk tonight, at some point I'll bring up those cards that you sent earlier in the day. I just haven't had time to do it yet.
They're related to the ongoing evolution of two of the decks that you are showing in those four, the Golden Dawn and the Top.
Okay.
They're now just more modern, and they're including more symbols from different traditions. And what I really liked about that deck is that they also used a lot of animal symbolism. That's the boar with and the snake and the caddises and all of these symbols that we are all very familiar with, but we don't really know the esoteric meaning.
Right. Okay, so we'll start with the four decks, and then once people get into the swing of what the decks that we're talking about, we will bring your cards up also and talk about them.
Yeah. And you have the Crowley deck book, and I have this one.
Right.
And another one. So I've been busy with that. So it'd be great to compare what Crowley said from your book and from what these books talk about. Yeah. And Raquel, we tried getting the Mystic Tarot but it's not there.
It's not there. Oh
no, she has a new deck. Julie Sherman Burke has a new deck that's been illustrated by some guy who's illustrated other people's decks, which is not the same one who illustrated the deck with the original deck with Liz Green. So, but I couldn't find it. But if you can find it for me, send me an email.
I'll look for it. The website that I saw. I don't remember.
Yeah, I saw one and I click and then it doesn't take me to.
Okay, there are a couple of shops online in Europe that have a huge number of decks, so you might want to check that out. I don't remember the name of them offhand at the moment.
I haven't come across them.
Pardon?
I haven't found them. I mean, it's my old deck. I researched the artist, which is really interesting because one of the artists, right? She's from England, and she's big with printing, and she does woodcuts. So she will be able to make a real nice woodcuts. Make that give it that look of very refined art.
Yeah. Okay. So good evening, everyone. We are here to talk about the Court of Swords tonight in the Tarot. And we're talking about the Tarot as a roadmap for life, because the Tarot cards carry the energies that all of us face in our lifetime. And so when you understand these cards, you can reflect on them as they relate to your own life, and they may give you some guidance in terms of how to solve a problem and so on. And this is aside from divination, which divination also works for that purpose, but it's a bit more helter skelter. So if you understand the tarot as sort of guidance for life, it seems to me it's very useful as you go through your own individuation. Does anybody want to comment on that point? And hello, Annabelle. Nice to see you tonight.
Hi, very
Oh.
nice to see you too.
On that point, we were reading a little history, and it mentioned that due to the fact that the tarot has been used for divination is one of the main points in why it has survived up to this time.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So let's not discard that little tool.
Right, because typically, mostly women believed that the tarot worked. I don't think before the late 20th century, or maybe the early 20th century, but before the early 20th century, I think people understood that something was happening, but they didn't know what. And so it just, it refined and people bought in on it.
Yeah, it's like a method that has evolved, like
Right.
astrology.
Right, like astrology, exactly the same thing,
Mhm.
or the same idea, but a different
And what is
method.
what is curious is that both the two most famous decks, the Thoth and the Rider Waite, were illustrated by women.
Yes,
Both. And I read in the history that Crowley was not that well known. He became well known because of that tarot deck illustrated by Lady Frida,
right.
and the other deck illustrated by Pamela
Coleman Smith, yes,
Coleman Smith,
right.
also is what generated that fame. And as a child, the women in my family used the Spanish cards,
Yeah.
and aunts and relatives around that. There was always what we called, oh, who's the next witch or whatever, that's just a friendly term. But in general, it was certainly somebody would, the new one coming in, the young one coming in, there would be one here, one there, that would take, and they would be reading this. And I realized that I think their influence is probably French, from the French side of the tarot that would have
Well,
France for a very long time.
Yeah, and also relates to intuition. And so traditionally, women have always had more intuition than men do.
Mhm. Yeah, the men
al-
weren't.
Although I'm one of those exception men who has a lot of intuition. I test very far out on the scale. But
So that's a very interesting point, and rather unusual, because most other systems have been created by men. And
right,
in
and
reality, it's a system, it's a esoteric, and it's so universal that it's still running. But I realized that just like there's like Ken Wilber created a system, Ken Wilber, the philosopher, stages of evolution. His is a system. You can put it in some tarot card deck and it's a
Right.
system. So tarot is a system. And
all very rational, what Ken Wilber would have done. And it's but we're the opposite here. We're the opposite of Jordan Peterson. Okay, Jordan Peterson is the savior of the logos, and this is the eros that we're talking about here. This is life, and this is how life works. And you can learn all the rules. You will learn the rules. You know, this is the rational approach.
Well, the interesting thing is that it's seen as the arrows, and then the logos is hidden in it.
Yeah,
Which is the opposite of the regular way of other systems. Here,
Yeah.
the arrows is exhibited, but the logos is definitely hidden in it.
yeah.
Through the
By
Kabbalah.
other systems, we would be talking about things like the Bible and you know, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not, or thou shalt do this or that. Those are rules. That's what the rational systems do. And the tarot, while it has rules, they aren't front and center.
Exactly.
Right. And so,
And because of that, it was able to survive. through
yes,
all over in all kinds of unusual places. So
Right.
that kind of tells us something about rules.
right. That it was always a way to understand around the rules, because rules are often too rigid and people need a way out. And I was reading Jungian analyst Jason Smith this week, and he's talking about partying. You know, partying is great because it allows you to, you know, get away from the Iron Maiden of rules that exist in our society and just have a party and let it all hang out and so on. But you have to do your partying in containment. In other words, you know, never in zip code 21403, for example. Yes.
Yeah, that's
sort
one
the
of
idea.
one of the prince in the Thoth, the prince of sword, the prince of swords. And it says that that it has all that illumination, the air and air, right? It brings all these illuminations
Right.
and ideas. But and then it was a very strange quote that it says, and these people who carry this often die young. And metaphorically, let's say, it's because for the brightness that they carry, they didn't have to live to see it turning concretize and turn dogmatic, because that's what eventually happens with bright new things that come in. They move along, become concretized, dogmatic, and then eventually they don't work.
Right.
So they don't have to live, and that's a quality of the young, the heir of air, or the younger of the members of the suit of air, of the
Right.
swords.
So let's go around the room, and I'll pull up the first scans that I have, which is of the younger court cards, and let's talk about them and take turns. And so these are here's the page of swords. In the top, in the Golden Dawn deck, it's the Princess of Swords, and also in the Toth deck, they were related in some way, and the Valet d'Epée in the Marseille deck. And so, Raquel, do you want to start and just talk about the Page of Swords, and we can increase the size of any of these cards so that people can see them better.
I think there's a lot of different meanings because the Toth deck is very different, but the Marseille is not, even though it's the base of the Rider Waite, it's not actually, I think it's a different meaning, because the Page of Swords in the Rider Waite decks is the top one. I think it's related to a lot of information, not in an organized manner. It's a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, but not actually a lot of doing, even though I think the Page of Swords is similar to the Ace of Swords in the sense of like knowing how a spoken word can bring things to action, even though you might not think about that before you speak, you know. And then especially in the Page of Swords, I think in the Ace, it's kind of more like, even though you're not aware fully aware that your words can bring a certain type of action, it's something that you are creating. But in a Page of Swords, it's a lot of just talking around and not really doing anything. So it's more like being affected by the words and not creative with the words, I think. But I think in the Marseille is more about knowledge and not actually about speaking or talking. It's more about
Right. It's about discernment, isn't it?
Yeah.
In other words, it's taking logos, rationality, and cutting into the chaos to try to get something out of it. In one way, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Gilda, do you want to talk about it? And then
Yeah, we came across some interesting things that, you know, is partially what Raquel is talking about. And it was very curious that although these the page, the knight, the king, and the queen are separate things to look at, separate ways of functioning. They're all present all the time in all of the you know, they're present now, whether the ability is there to bring it forth, like the Page of Swords will bring these brilliant ideas that will take the dust away from the old dogmas. It will blow it right out. And then, but the next step in the cycle is bring it in and start working on how to make that a manifestation that works or can
Right.
be utilized. Or but on an inner journey, it definitely already has an impact if one, like through individuation, where things are handled inwardly, and what happens outside already carries may carry the function of the knight, the queen. It's already more encompassing. With you work with other people or so on. Inwardly, you are addressing the totality of all the qualities of that brilliant air
right.
to manifestation. It doesn't. It's there to take the dust away, to bring brilliance, because it's usually the creative. It's so creative. It's extremely creative because it's raw, and it's not formed yet. It's not calcified. It's not concretized in order to make it something. But it's full of energy and brilliance.
Well, it's in the process of making something now, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the origin of the movement.
Yeah. So Lisa, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something here?
I do. I see that he's passionate, very passionate, and it is discernment that he's using, riding the wave of intellect rather than emotions. Because if you look at his shoes are red, and the water that he's riding is yellow, which to me indicates or signifies the intellect rather than the emotions, because the blue waves to the right of his feet are it's a different color.
Yeah.
And this person, the page, knows that his choice in words, depending on what he chooses to use, his words can cut like a sword.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they definitely can.
Exactly.
Yeah. Annabelle, did you want to talk about this?
Sure. I've been using a Rider Waite deck this week for a few days now. I feel as though I just allowed myself to go from kindergarten to first grade as far as a student, you know, within this class of tarot. And my sort of favorite deck of Marseille has not emerged in my unpacking where I live yet, but the Rider Waite did, which has been very interesting. So I'm feeling more familiar with these images. And this page, to me, the first thing I see is that he's in motion, and it's a kind of dance, a kind of, it demonstrates his youth, a sort of agility.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I see first, and both of those are really first at the same time, is these clouds. And the clouds are just so triumphant and dynamic, and obviously also in motion. They don't look static. They look like they're just billowing clouds. So those are my strongest impressions of this page of Soar. And then of course there is that potential to, I feel as though I've used this expression before, the Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche title, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, that this is very much, he's ready to cut through to the core. Yeah.
Right.
I'll add that those birds in the top, they appear and they're mentioned that they fly above.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the mind flying above all of everything in order to be able to see something new and creative.
Birds in the Toth.
Well, Page of Swords. You see the birds up there?
Yeah, I see the bird.
Right, in the Toth they appear also, but not. They appear in the Knight of Swords, and it talks about them. So here the birds are being used to represent, and the birds represent that they're flying high above, even above the clouds. So the mind is riding high above everything in order to find find a creative, a brand new creative outlook.
Right.
And also this is supposedly the earth part of air, and so it is standing on ground. And the Princess of Swords down here is also on ground, and it talks about types of behaviors that are revolutionary, that are the quality of this page can be revolutionary and antagonistic and all of that, in order to bring forth very new things. So they're hard to handle. They can be hard to handle because they either fly so high, or they, in order to be able to penetrate what's old and dogmatic and turn it into something new, they either fly too high, or they can be antagonistic.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think about in the swords is that it's about discernment. And I always think that the first court card, the opposite of the king, whether it's a princess or a page or whatever it is a young person who all of a sudden has all the knowledge of the world available to them. They see it, but they don't know what it all means. So they haven't discerned what it means. But anybody have any comment on this structure here coming out of this guy's head?
Oh yeah, it's loose. So instead of being tied, you know how in the Page of Cups, the fish coming out and the hat had a, they all it blended together.
Yeah.
Well, here is the hair is loose. So this person is loose.
So you think this is hair, this black stuff?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's
I think so
loose.
too.
Yes, it's loose.
Okay.
And it's going into the sky. It's loose and it's unbounded. The rest of him I'd rather put together, but the hair is like
Right. Well,
crawling out
the
there.
Golden Dawn version seems to be pretty uptight to me.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah, I think, yeah.
and
It's like a man bun.
right, and when I compare the Rider Waite to the Marseille seems to be a young person who's all of a sudden sees all the information of the world, and he's got a sword to discern the difference, to cut things up very rationally, but he's sort of doubtful about it. He's still a ingenue and he's not too sure about it, whereas the Rider Waite, he's much more confident.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what's going on in the Golden Dawn deck, which is the Supper Rate deck. So obviously a female figure, and I don't know what she's got her hand on here.
Oh, well, and the Golden Dawn, isn't the Golden Dawn related to the top?
Yeah, sure they are.
Right. So it's my understanding that the neophytes would be told to make a deck. So since they were all working on transcendent functions of of alchemical, that's why here it seems it's more lofty. It's not so much mundane as it seeks to completely transcend. And
Right.
so it's got the gold transcendent to gold. It's got the golden cape and a golden cap. And it's standing on clouds with a hand inside the earth matter that's putting out smoke. Right? It's that's sticking a hand in the only thing that's solid there. But it's elevated into the heights of it's not working with earthiness.
Yeah.
It's
So Magic Sufi asks a question that maybe some of you will know. I don't know. He says, or she says, any opinions on archetypal relationship and Game of Thrones characters, if you're familiar with them? And I never got into Game of Thrones because that's sort of after my individuation time, so I never got very interested in it. But
yeah, I have a sense that it comes from tarot and that, but and it's taken into a screen as a game, but I never really and I it's like
never did a matchup on it.
Modern computer games, they simulate real life real well. So the journeys that all of that stuff, it's kind of like reading 1984 on steroids,
Yeah, and so Game of Thrones would be that. Go ahead,
yeah,
Raquel.
so I do.
I think that the Page of Swords, it's difficult to see in one character of Game of Thrones. I think it could be related a little bit about Tyrion, because he's one of the masters of knowing how to communicate with everyone for his own behalf, for his own good. But I think that for the court cards of the sword cards, I think Ned will be the King of Swords, which was the main character almost in the first season of Game of Thrones, that got beheaded in the end of the first season. But I think he would be a good representation of the King of Swords.
And I also think that the Page, although it's doing things from their own selfish point of view, they're not so aware they are being selfish as, let's say, the King of Swords would be tricky and already in charge and knows exactly what he's doing, where the Page is is just trying to be creative, and you're not necessarily intentional that it's all for me, for me. They're just embarking on their evolution.
Well, okay, well, Gilda, you wanted to read about the Toth deck, but before we do that, I have 78 Degrees of Wisdom from Rachel Pollack here. And so let me just read briefly what she says about the Page of Swords. And then we'll go and we'll read the two versions of the Toth deck. So we're talking about the card in the upper upper left-hand corner here. This is the Rider Waite Colman deck. I think it's the most common deck that you'll find anywhere. Most people start on the Rider Waite deck, and so it's a good place to start anyway, because it's straightforward. So here's what she says. A much lighter card than the other court swords, the page represents a very different approach to problems than the knight. Notice that while the knight and the queen, notice that while the king and queen emphasize wisdom, the two younger cards deal with swords' more immediate quality of conflict. Rather than charge them, he finds it sufficient to simply get above them, to find the high ground. Instead of solving conflicts or meeting opposition, he detaches himself. If the situation is one that calls for such an easygoing approach, then the page's unattached attitude is very beneficial. But if a more difficult problem is involved, then the page's practice becomes hard to maintain. It requires vigilance, to use Waite's term, making sure that people or situations do not get too close. Much of the page's energy goes to looking over his shoulder as a somewhat aged student. Hamlet embodied the page's attitude of observation and irony. His situation, however, called for the aggressive approach of the knight. Because of his detached quality, the page can sometimes indulge himself in spying on other people, either literally or figuratively, as an attitude to life. In other words, he may look on human life as a kind of curious spectacle in which he himself does not expect to take part. Reversed, here we see the effect of the page's aloof attitude in a situation that requires more force. The vigilance turns to paranoia. Everyone appears to be an enemy. What began as a feeling of I'm above all that, I don't need to concern myself with that, becomes an obsession with problems and a seeming inability to do anything about them. Such feelings of weakness are endemic to swords. They require wands for courage and optimism. Okay, so I've recently been doing a fairly detailed study on the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which is Lawrence of Arabia. And you see in that movie and in the book that Lawrence is, both the sort of the ingenue, he doesn't want to get into life, but at the same time, he's forced to do it, and he's making observations about it. But toward the end of the movie, there's a very interesting exchange when he's about to leave, having done everything that he did in the First World War, and Prince Faisal says to him, well, okay, now, Lawrence, you run along. Thank you very much. You did a lot for me, but war is a young man's business, and now we old men have to decide the peace. And then he turns to the general and says, and you only have to be a general. I have to be a king. And so really speaks a lot to these issues.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
So any other comments? Okay, now Gilda and I are going to talk about the Toth deck. We're going to read the same thing for the Toth deck, and this is the Toth deck. And here it's the Princess of Swords. And do you want to read yours first, or do you want me to read mine first?
Well, why don't we alternate? So since you just read, then I'll read and like that.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, here we go. I have two books and they are distinct. I'll just read this one in particular. Princess of Swords is the picture. The Princess of Swords personifies the irrational purposefulness of the feminine power and represents the area of earth and the element air, the materialization or fixation of the volatile. You know, these are alchemical, like when you transform matter, that you have to first make it, vaporize it, or do different things. This young and irresistible life energy manifesting itself in the energetic arm movements is careless and too hasty. At the same time, it is naive and innocent, comparable with a childlike self corresponding less to the conscious will than the unconscious wishes, which actually encompass a great part of the true goals than our rational mind. Crowley writes, she stands in front of a barren altar as if to avenge its profanity, and she stabs downward with her sword. This external attitude is in a certain respect, a contradiction to the altar itself, which is a symbol of intellectuality, contemplation, and inner maturity, and generally indicates a spiritualized personality development far from all desires for revenge. Her combative posture, as that of an Amazon, daughter of the battleground, the sky and the clouds are filled with anger, and on her head she wears a helmet crowned by the snake-haired Medusa. She is then a symbol of vehement impulsivity and represents the spontaneous reaction presenting itself directly into the world, the inner child, perceiving the world through the right unconscious half of the brain. This impulse empowers the innate knowledge to not only react to surroundings, but to also have a different effect on them, as a modern mystic writes. It is this penetrating through to perception that gives rise to the development of our being. You feel that your own being has prepared for this moment of development over a long period of time. Perhaps there's a long time of incubation in which we are dissatisfied with ourselves, since we consciously sense the abundance of possibilities within us that are in existence but have not appeared. And then we break through with one blow. So that kind of shows you that. So I think that's good enough. There's more, but I think that kind of it's that power to break it. It's also works with like students when they have great insights in the universe, in theories that are so fabulous, but then you have to take that theory and
Apply
not
it.
exactly, and it doesn't always translate just exactly like that. So.
It doesn't always work out the way you expect.
Exactly, because of concretization and all of that. But one must understand it is a cycle, because it gets concretized and then dogmatized and then eventually doesn't work anymore. So it's all, it's like, where are you standing at the moment in which you are addressing this particular energy source.
Right. Hi,
Um,
Nancy. Nice to see Nancy Pfaff here. Very nice.
Raquel has a version of the Golden Dawn, I think.
Go ahead, Raquel.
I have the Robert Wayne book, An Introduction to Golden Dawn Tarot. And I
Okay.
found the part that he talks about the Gondola Dawn card, which also has the Medusa sigil in the card.
Hmm.
I think
Okay, that's in her belt, I presume.
yeah, yeah. I can read a little bit because I think
Yeah, why
it's
don't you go ahead and read that, and then I'll come back to the other version of the toss.
it says an Amazon figure with waving hair slither than the rose of the Palace of Fire, which is the knife, the Princess of Wands, I think. Her attire is similar. The feet seem springy, giving the idea of swiftiness. Weight changing from one foot to another and body swinging around. She resembles a mixture of Minerva and the Diana. Her mantle resembles the aegis of Minerva. She wears as a crest the head of Medusa with serpent hair. She holds a sword in one hand and the other rests upon a small silver altar with gray smoke, no fire, ascending from it. Beneath her feet are white cirrus clouds. It represents wisdom, strength, acuteness, subtleness in material things, grace, and dexterity. I don't know how to speak that. Sorry.
Dexterity,
If,
yeah.
if
Dexterity.
yeah, if ill dignified, she is frivolous and cunning. She rules a quadrant of the heavens around the sphere of Kether in the tree of life.
Right. So Minerva was the goddess of wisdom, and Diana was the huntress. And
Yes.
it brings to mind. I'll just stop to share for a moment. It brings to mind this. I'm sorry, Susan Boatwright. I'm getting you in now. I apologize for not being able to see your presence. Anyway. Gilda, I'm going to make you co-host so that you can keep going in case I lose power or something terrible like that. But what this reminds me of is I follow a Calvinist pastor in Sacramento named Paul Vanderklay, who's gobsmacked about Jordan Peterson, and so I've been hectoring him for about 3 years, but he often has really good wisdom. And this week, he was talking with this young man about pornography, and he says that a real woman is way more terrifying than pornography. And it came to me that your individuation has begun when you can put down the pornography and face a real woman and face life, right? And you can't individuate unless you can interact with a real woman. And but he says that's way more terrifying. And
it's interesting because Minerva is as Athena, she's more like absolutely related to her masculine side.
Yes.
Because she's only daughter of her father. She doesn't really have a mother, in the Greek mythology.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, Diana, which is Greek mythology, is Artemis, is the goddess of moon and hunting. She's the sister of Apollos. But Artemis refuses men so much that she decided to never really grow fully. She doesn't grow old. She kept her body as a 10-year-old. So no man would see her as a woman, always see as a child. You know, it's a weird kind of protection. So it's interesting that they are relating actually Athena, Artemis, and Medusa, that was a woman who was cursed by Athena because of her hair.
Right.
Because of her
Because of her
beauty.
beauty, yeah. Because of jealousy, of envy. And it's
Right.
interesting, those three archetypes of women that's so different from each other.
Well, yeah, and Medusa, of course, you know, freezes men in their tracks.
Yeah.
That's pretty terrifying.
Well, it's very interesting the way that it grow. You know, all the court cards are actually related. That's why the tarot is so beautiful in taking us through all versions that mature us into different facets. Because by the time I read in this book about the Queen of Swords, it says that she has now, which is the water element of air, and this is the earth element. She's still on earth, trying to, from concrete, create a brilliancy that's from the air. It says that she has conquered not needing a patron. In other words, she has the ability for sustainability, and if she doesn't need someone to take care of her to be who she is. So that would be by the time it gets to the queen. The princess is still just manifesting that possibility to eventually come on board as her own experience, in her own experience.
Well, let me read this version of the Toth, which is again referring to this particular card. And he says, the Princess of Swords represents the earthy part of air, the fixation of the volatile. She brings about the materialization of idea. She represents the influence of heaven upon earth. She partakes of the characteristics of Minerva and Artemis, Artemis being Diana of the Hundreds, and there is some suggestion of the Valkyrie. She represents to some extent the anger of the gods, and she appears helmeted, I guess helmeted that means, with serpent-haired Medusa for her crest. She stands in front of a barren altar as if to avenge its profanation, and she stabs downward with her sword. The heaven and the clouds, which are her home, seem angry. The character of the princess is stern and revengeful. Her logic is destructive. She is firm and aggressive, with great practical wisdom and subtlety in material things. She shows great cleverness and dexterity in the management of practical affairs, especially where they are of a controversial nature. She is very adroit in the settlement of controversies. If ill-dignified, all these qualities are dispersed, she becomes incoherent, and all her gifts tend to combine to form a species of low cunning whose object is unworthy of the means. In the I Ching, the earthy part of air is represented by the 18th hexagram, Ku. This means troubles. It is, for all practical and material matters, the most unhappy symbol in the book. All the fine qualities of air are weighed down, suppressed, suffocated. People thus characterized are slow mentally, the prey of constant anxiety, crushed by every kind of responsibility, but especially in family affairs. One of both of the parents will usually be found in the etiology. It is hard to understand line 6, which shows one who does not serve either king or feudal lord, but in the lofty spirit prefers to follow his own bent. The explanation is that a princess as such, being the throne of spirit, may always have the option of throwing everything overboard, blowing everything sky high. Such action would account for the characteristics above given for the card, which when well dignified. Such people are exceedingly rare, and naturally enough, they appear often as children of misfortune. Nevertheless, they have chosen aright and in due season gain their reward. One of the things that I came up years ago in my local group was we were talking about health class in high school, and one of the women in the class said that what happened in my high school, or my junior high school, I guess, in the 8th grade, was that they would separate the boys and the girls and go give them a different health class. And this particular member of my group said, yeah, and we were mad when we heard what we were being taught. And of course, they don't teach boys anything about sex for a couple of years later than the girls. So when we were like 12 years old, the girls were going off and hearing this stuff about the responsibilities they were going to have in life, and they got angry. And as I hear about this card, it makes me think about that. And the boys, we got some pablum about eating healthy or something like that. And they never really told us what it was all about. In fact, I don't think I ever had a class that told us what it was about in school. And so guys have to learn in the locker room, I guess, but girls would get educated. And so I can imagine that there was a certain amount of wrath involved in learning. But Annabella, did you have a numinous event this week? I'm just curious.
Oh, yes, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
You look comfortable in your new home.
So many of them. Yeah, I'm reclining this evening. I don't remember whether was I here last week? Because I had these medical appointments. No, I wasn't here last week. So I didn't get to tell you that I learned that I have a drifting left eye, and I have convergence insufficiency. Convergence insufficiency, which means that when you're looking out toward the horizon, it's not coming together in a point.
I have that same issue.
You really? Yeah.
Yeah, but I have it on horizontal writing on computer screen. So in other words, if I'm trying to read something off a computer screen, I'm seeing double.
Right.
And it doesn't come together, so that that's when I have to wear my eye patch. But for example, now I see perfectly well, you and all the other members of the group.
Oh, well, that's good. They haven't figured that out for me. They want me to go to another specialist now. But they've had me backtrack with my prescriptions for my lenses.
Mm-hmm.
My regular ophthalmologist, who was involved with the 2 eye operations, apologized for giving me a prescription where my 3-dimensional vision was limited. And he said, good thing you didn't fall down a staircase. So I did have that. But yeah, so I've been reading cards. Well, Yeah, no, a million things. But yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now. But Lisa and I have been in a little bit of contact, which I have to give her credit for kind of inspiring me. And it was indirectly to be actually reading cards daily. So I pull 2 each day. It's been really helpful.
Yeah.
I'll share a little paragraph from a different, I showed you this before.
Sure.
And this one is from 1986, and it's a Mirror of the Soul handbook for the Aleister Crowley Tarot. And it gives you similar but different. This one's rather short. So the key words here are the earthy aspect of air out of the clouds into clarity. So we must understand that this page is trying to break free from not having clarity, and there's a victory over moods, and that causes them to be somewhat rebellious because it's not just handed to you on a silver platter sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the Princess of Swords represents a fresh intellectual clarity which shakes everything up. She has just demolished the old altar, which explodes, sending clouds of smoke. So there you have that in the Golden Dawn, the clouds of smoke, right? Rubble and ash into the air. When intellectual and spiritual air renewal meets the element of earth within those two, then renewal meets the element of earth, the altars of old ideas are destroyed, and the smoke will soon settle, leaving room for clarity.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how these meanings relate so much about, I think, the life path of womanhood, because as what Skip said earlier about girls having to learn about sex and responsibility a lot sooner than boys.
Yeah.
It's also kind of like possibly the Princess of Swords is in this idea of the earth representation of wind, of the swords. Only the women have to work through an ideal of being, I think, because men can have all the ideas and be brilliant, and just kind of just probably live through their minds, but the women, we do get this idea pretty soon of what we're supposed to be, but then we have to break it through it.
Yeah.
We have this idea, but then we have to crash it and then become whatever it is that we are, because the idea that we receive of our lives and our responsibilities are not quite enough for everything that we are, and
Absolutely.
I think that with the man it's different because it's much more of a linear path. I think a little bit it's more like, to a man everything can be more obvious, but for a woman, if you break, for instance, the idea of maternity, the idea of becoming a mother, you crash one of the pillars of womanhood itself, and sometimes to recreate that inside of your life without the task of being a mother, you still are going to live your entire womanhood as a body. You're still going to have a womb, you're still going to go through periods and
Yeah, all
and
that
everything
stuff.
yeah.
Right. Well, I think when, girls are often tomboys when they're young, 10, 11, 12, and they're running around with the guys and having fun, doing whatever we do, playing on the jungle gym or whatever. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, we're going to have to do this too. And, I think that society originally, just saw women as the reproducers of the species, but not much more. But now, as we've lived longer, we know that not only can women do that part, but they can also do everything else, that pretty much anything else that men can do. And
I used to call it the Wonder Woman syndrome. The Wonder Woman syndrome is like you had to get up early, you do the things in the house, prepare the meal, know about meals and
Yeah.
everything else, work and be out in the world and work in office, wherever it was you were working, and come back and maybe if you had something else you did other than work, like I danced ballet or whatever, and then go out at night and be a vamp. By 9 o'clock you had to turn into a vamp and do the other part. I mean, and you had to be proficient in all of these, all of them
right,
at the
right.
same time. And yeah, women cannot get away. They have to embody the earth, the water, and the intellect. They have to, that they have it as well. But for a long time, that wasn't recognized, but that was there.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I can say that in my first marriage, I was not very happy because my first wife just wanted to live, in the house with the white picket fence with her kids and have me support her and all that. Everything would be hunky dory in life, right? But I wasn't getting any intellectual stimulation
Mm.
out of her. And so Debbie and I became what I say is the first couple to meet online and marry. And because,
Online.
pardon?
Online.
We met online
Wow.
on August the 22nd, 1985. And I've never met or heard of anyone that met online before that date and later married, not a single one. And we
Pioneer.
yeah, we were pioneers. But what happened to me in that case was I started to exchange emails with Debbie, and in 4 months, I knew Debbie far more than I knew my wife of 17 years. And it was just hopeless. It was over.
Yeah, you were starved. That part of you, of your tantric relationship, was absolutely starved.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
you just catapulted into that direction.
Yeah, and so probably among couples that have broken up, we did it the best in the sense that I was very fastidious about keeping a relationship with my daughters, and I still love my first wife in a certain way, but more like a sister today. I don't have any objection to her, except I didn't want to live with her anymore.
Right. Yeah, you grew and she somehow did it.
Yeah. But meanwhile, Deb never had children herself. And that's a long story, but she, by the time I met her, she was not going to have children. And so it turned out perfectly, because my children now have basically two mothers on their father's side.
That's
And
nice.
my daughters have accepted Debbie and Debbie's mother as if they were biological mother and grandmother. And so
Yeah, they have more females that care for them, which is
yeah.
really nice.
And so you get that transference. And in Jungian psychology, my mother died in 2009, but my mother-in-law lives with us basically in an adjoining apartment. And I think of her as my mother now, you know, and so that same human relationship that you have with your mother, I now feel it for my mother-in-law. So it's just interesting how these things develop.
Right, because if let's say, for example, since you were starved in the intellectual aspect, and that is one of your fortes, and then that becomes too fortified, then the other ones then become out of balance.
Yep.
So by having, placing some emphasis through other facets of other friends, women friends, to
Mhm.
complete your integration, then you feel supported in all those
Yeah.
angles.
Now, I just want to, before we move on to the nights, I just want to make a brief advertisement for what we're going to do next year, because I recently had a cancer diagnosis of prostate cancer, and so for all you men out there, make sure you get tested because you need to catch it early. Fortunately, I have done, and so I'll be taking care of it over the summer. But one of the things that came to me immediately as soon as I had that diagnosis, the first thing that came into my mind was that I'd like to have my portrait done by Tim Holmes, who's a frequent participant here, and my partner on the Wisdom Path colloquia that we sometimes see here. And so I spent a week ago Friday with Tim, and one of the things I did was this nude posing session, which I put the link to that on both the YouTube and the Zoom chat. And it was quite a numinous time for us, that for Tim and me, that 33-hour period that we were together last week. And so we decided we're going to do it again. And because it came to us over the course of the day that that we are really creators of our own lives. Okay, we are the creators, and how that came about is beyond the scope of this advertisement. But it also relates to the divine creator and so on. But in order to have an active life, we have to have a perspective where we are the creators. So it's all well and good to go out and play video games or do whatever to understand what's going on in this chaotic world, and to study the Tarot to understand it. But in the end, you have to create your own life. And you can't wait for somebody else to come down and swoop you up, and everything will be hunky-dory after that. And so next year in June of 2022, the 10th and 14th to 14th of June, we're going to do a conference in Helena, Montana, with Tim, in Tim's office, or his studio. His studio is quite a unique place. It's 7,000 square feet, and I promise you a numinous experience if you go there, because this building has like 5,000 drawings all over the place in that building, and he says 280 sculptures in the basement, plus. So it's huge. It's a huge place, and it was built as a home for wayward women in 1890, and so it has all kinds of ghosts and interesting things going on in it. And so we're going to.
Does he capture those on his sculptures?
Sure he does. Yeah, he does. for example, he did a sculpture of Jacob wrestling with the angel, and he does a lot of religious related sculpture and drawings, and he's got this one drawing of Jacob sitting on a rock minding his own business, and this angel is coming down at high speed behind him ready to grab him. And, yeah, so it's quite evocative. But anyway, it will be an experiential period. And it so happens that it's quite near to Yellowstone. So after this 4-day conference, we'll also do a tour of Yellowstone National Park, which is a target for many people.
And what does he say about Yellowstone?
What about it?
What does he, what kind of mystical stories does he have about Yellowstone?
Well, in 33 hours, we really didn't get to that. But
Oh, because while you post, you chit chat,
well, we were chit-chatting about Lawrence of Arabia mostly.
Oh,
But I guess the point is that Yellowstone speaks for itself. If you know what Yellowstone is, you know that it's an unbelievable place, and it happens to be very close to Helena, so it's within
Never
striking
been.
distance. So there's two purposes, and so I hope people start putting these dates into your calendar, and we'll go forth from there. And it'll be fun. And nobody will make you pose nude, by the way, so don't worry about that.
well, we have some professionals here.
But one of the things that Tim did say is that there will be a nude modeling session where he talks, where he introduces a nude model and does drawings of her and describes what he calls alchemical alchemical art with the model, where she participates in the process and gets in people's faces and so on. And so it's going to be a very interesting 4 days, and there'll be a religious come spiritual component to it. We are calling it the creator's art. And I have invited Paul Vanderklay to give the keynote at the event. I haven't heard from him. I think he's probably so shocked that he got the invitation and doesn't know what to say.
I think it's a great venue also for artists to come and participate.
Yeah.
I just don't know if they can get there, financially or otherwise, but
Yeah. Well,
and then it
it's going
becomes
to
a
be
conference of artists.
Yeah,
And
it is going to be that, and it's going to be cheap. It's going to be under $500 to attend, and I managed to get out there pretty cheaply. It only cost me $400 to go from Annapolis, Maryland to Helena, so as long as you're willing to go economy, so it's not so bad. And I have the next set of cards here, and I was looking for it on my screen, but I often get lost on my own computer screen. So now I've found it. But anyway, it's going to be a numinous time. It will be experiential. We promise you numinosity guaranteed, or your money back. And you won't have to pose nude, but Tim is going to do starts of 4 portraits during this time, one a day, in the morning, he'll do a 2-hour start and talk about what he's doing and how he's going about doing the portrait. And then on some occasion during the 4 days, there'll be this female nude model who understands the process. So he's going to talk about it. He's going to actually have her doing this alchemical modeling, and then afterwards she is going to stay and talk about the experience from her point of view, where she's she gets in the other person's face, so everybody will be able to draw her. There will be art supplies and so on, but it's going to be I promise you it's going to be exciting, interesting, and so we had fun. We have lots of room in that building for it. So
Yeah, I can share that once a year in a Pratt Institute in New York, which is a design and it's this design university. They hold what they call a drawing marathon. So it's very interesting, and I'll share some of the details in case something can strikes the creative process here. They want to utilize it. So it's from 7 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah. So everybody arrives, and then at some point they bring drummers, hand drummers. So you've got hand drummers. The whole place is it's you know, it's totally zooming with energy and sound, and of course it's many models, and all of the students show up, and then they about midnight or so they have pizza, and the whole thing keeps going until 7 in the morning. And so
Cool.
it starts with, let's say, the models, 20-hour poses, then 1-hour poses, then 2, and then they combine models. So then there's more than one, there's 2, there's 3 in different rooms. And then at the end, they all are in one platform. So you, as an artist, you'd be drawing from a platform with about 16 models standing around. So
Wow.
that's just an idea of
Mm.
something marathon type thing that's really fun.
It sounds like something I want to see us do. So that's a great idea, Gilda. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
very fun.
I'm going to give the next card here, and I'll ask. Let's see. Like this. Come on. Okay, Raquel, you want to talk about the Knight or the Prince of Swords, the Cavalier d'Épée, or the Knight of Swords? Anyway,
Yeah,
Raquel.
the Knight of Swords in the Mythic Tarot, it's Castor and Pollux are the twins of wind.
Mhm.
They are one of the most, I believe, negative cards in the Mythic Tarot, because it's just kind of like about destruction. You know, it's about a bad use of the words, you know, a bad use of speech, because it talks a lot about a person that doesn't know how to communicate, that doesn't know how to say whatever they want to say because they don't have limits, you know. So it's a pretty chaos energy, I think.
Mhm.
What's that book somewhere here?
I think it's one of the most complicated cards to find in a reading, because it's always shows also how much words can hurt, you know, how much
Sure.
you can hurt someone by just talking in a more aggressive way, I
Yeah.
think, or an irresponsible way.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind for me is Marine Corps lieutenants. Okay, the second lieutenants, first lieutenants, who come out of the basic school and they think they're God, and they get assigned a platoon, 50 men, and they think they know it all. And when I look at the Rider Waite Knight of Swords, that's what I think of. Fortunately, I was never like that, of course, because but partially because I grew up in the military, so I knew a few things before I got to that rank.
But I think
Um,
that the emotion is very obvious in all of the cards. It's
yes,
always pushing forward.
yeah, pushing forward, don't hesitate, and it's only after you do your first or second cavalry charge that you become a little bit more thoughtful about your approach to life. Um, uh, so I've been there. I acknowledge that that is the way we are, and there's an apocryphal story that the average life expectancy of a second lieutenant in combat was typically 15 seconds. And the reason for that was that they were so arrogant and so ridiculous in their attitudes that they would get a bullet from their platoon sergeant, not from the enemy. And you can see that kind of expressed in these cards um, where these guys are all, as we say, balls to the wall, and they're ready to go on the attack. They're not sadder but wiser yet.
There's a process in alchemy, like the first one when and you show the smoke coming out, and so in here they call it that this is the solve and coagula stage. So
Solve and coagula.
yeah, in some way, well, it's from this book here. He writes about a Nobel Prize scientist who wrote, "Our whole world actually represents a non-balanced system. One single current that links its power with another current can become strong enough to rearrange the whole pattern. The path is that it chooses in the I mean, like in the I'm sorry, I need like my glasses. The path that it chooses in this unstable condition is unpredictable, spontaneous, presumably creative. It is here that the deterministic laws collapse. This is the solve and coagula, the solve and bind of alchemy." So in some there, what I've noticed about all of these cards is that they have that brilliant positive side, and then there's the negative side when it's not inwardly in individuation harnessed in order to move to the next level, or outwardly one is not surrounded by, let's say, a king of swords, or the other ones that keep the pillars are all present in order to come to a fifth thing that would be, so when that's not present, then taking this cards, any card singularly, page, knight, king, whomever, singularly, they simply have that none of them are completely without shadow. So
Very definitely. And very, very often young men are arrogant, and so they get taught to do something, some basic thing, whatever it is, and then they think they know it all. And in battle, that can be deadly, not only for them but for their men. Um, and so
So this also, the which is very interesting, the Prince of Swords is also related to, somebody in individuation and in spiritual path. It is very important not to grasp. This is actually one of the major things to be able to move forward and allow the process to continue evolving. And so
Right.
this is one of the cards that is specializes in cutting in spontaneity and lacking and not grasping.
Right.
So whenever that's necessary, in order to get rid of old patterns that are running on automatic, or
Mhm.
old ways of being in society, or old rules and regulations that also think that they know it all, this is the card that will do that. And
Mhm.
it's also it's the first part of Aquarius and Capricorn, so it's got that impetus to, and it's also bright because it's a sword. Is it the intellect
Right.
is
Right. So somebody gets a little knowledge, typically a male gets a little knowledge, think they know it all, and then they go out and they get hit with the reality of life, and they either get brought down a peg or two or they die. Okay, it's very simple. And I know I've experienced that directly in battle, and it's not good. And you have to have a little wisdom in what you learn to do. So let me read what Rachel Pollack says about this. The young knight, whose youth makes him both freer of social responsibility than the king and less tempered by experience than the queen, rides directly into the storm, waving his sword in his eagerness to overcome all difficulties. He is brave, skillful, strong, yet he tends also toward wildness, even fanaticism. He recognizes no limits, and yet he often does not know how to sustain a long struggle. He expects his enemies and life's problems to fall under his charge, and cannot so easily handle a situation that requires long, steady plotting. His eagerness suggests a certain innocence, like a young knight who was never lost a battle. His bravery, his skill, his readiness to charge all problems can sometimes contain a fear of losing that innocence, that strong belief in himself, for he knows inside that he has yet to face and overcome life's greater difficulties. The opposite in many ways of the Knight of Cups. He directs all his energy outwards. He is perhaps nervous of being quietly alone with himself. Reversed, as the king and queen, his weakness take over. He is extravagant, careless, excessive. His charge becomes wild and mistaken response to a situation that calls for a quieter, more careful approach. Now, I know a man in history who fits this exactly, and that's Oliver North. And the reason I know that is because Oliver North was a classmate of mine in the basic school. And when he was gaining his notoriety around the time of Reagan, some of my classmates were aware of how he got his Silver Star, which is an award for bravery, but he was rather cavalier about how he handled an attack. So he survived and won a Silver Star, but 18 men who were with him died. And then another example came later when because he was working at the White House, he was an active duty officer at the time, and he was working at the White House. He ended up leading this attack into Iran to save the 400 or however many Americans were being held captive by the Iranians. This is back in the early 1980s, and it was a poorly thought out activity, and they ran into a sandstorm which caused the helicopters to crash in the middle of the desert. They never got to Tehran, and it was just a mess. And ultimately, Ali ended up being forced out of the Marine Corps before he could retire, 6 months before he had earned retirement. And he sort of never grew up. He ended up, he ended up doing this series of television programs about war stories and so on. And for a while, he was considered for vice president of the United States by the right wing. And then he became president of the National Rifle Association. But I'm not sure he ever got past this particular stage of development. At least that's not my perspective. I'm speaking only my own opinion about this individual, but boy, do I see him in this card. Go ahead.
Well, we find that sometimes not everything gets worked out outwardly in the world. And part of the individuation process is to take those parts that did not get to a final Ouroboros, complete Ouroboros, to transmute and transcend it. And that's where dreams are absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I become blown away from things that I come upon. And it takes care of everything, whether you had a remorse about that this didn't happen, or it just wanted one thing after another, you confront it. And that is also one of another deck I will introduce later on that uses one of the suits. It's about cleaning. You clear the deck, so then when you transcend into that position, you have already taken care of all the shadow. Now, I wanted to say a little something here about this Knight of Swords, Skip. In the Tarot of the Thoth, that would be the king. So the one that needs to be there is the Prince of Swords.
I beg your pardon. Okay,
The Knight of the Knight of Swords would be the king in the Thoth deck.
Right. Well, let me just see what I
Because
do.
I was trying to say the thing on the head, and the propeller and the how would
Okay, that's the King of Swords.
That is the King of Swords,
I got the wrong deck, but I can show the Prince of Swords. I've got him mixed up in the Kings, as you might guess.
Yeah, that's the one that goes there. It's confusing because he doesn't use king. I had to learn it the hard way too.
Yeah. Okay. So let me.
Like a little puzzle.
I'll pull it ahead. Okay.
There we go.
There's the Prince of Swords. Okay.
No, but not now. You put the king. Oh.
Yeah.
No.
But
this one is the knight.
Right, but this guy is the equivalent of the knight, is what you're saying, Prince of
Yes,
Swords.
and the king is the one you have in the last. You put in the last one. That is the king.
Right. Okay. So Gilda, you and I were going to read about the Knight of Swords.
Yeah, that's
in
what
the Toth. So that's what I have on the screen now. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. So
I just saw the king up top on the Rider deck.
Yeah, I just have it in the wrong. I can't now change it in the midst of a
right.
class.
Yeah. So this would be the one in the top deck, and it shows that that he can't quite maneuver well all of the things on his rhine that he's holding.
Mhm.
And the rhombus is right here at the center is below him, so he's still struggling to have a good grip on how to make manifestation out of his brilliance.
Okay, so Gilda, do you want to read the Toth that you have? I'm in the midst of looking for the
Okay.
for
Okay.
the
In the
card
Prince
that you wanted
of
to show.
Swords, we encounter as yet unordered power of the thought principle. It's unmethodical and changeable, constantly moving back and forth between the goals without coming to a clear standpoint. This turbulence of spirit, the airy realms of air, shows a double pyramid and geometric pattern expressing analytically perception and thereby symbol for the left rational half of the brain. The prince is, however, incapable of keeping his thoughts going in one firm objective direction. This is represented by the winged figures that pull the wagon but do not obey his reins. Instead, they tumble around in all directions. So he jumps from one thing to the next and does not know what it was he wanted 1 minute before. At the same time, this card also expresses the intellectual approaches to new paradigms, leaping into the Aquarian age. The theory of the dissipative structures, mechanisms of apparent chaotic courses and processes, for which the biochemist Elia Prigogine received the Nobel Prize, is among the most important in modern scientific findings. He writes, that's the one I read. Our whole world actually represents a non-balanced system. One single current that links its power with another current can become strong enough to rearrange the whole pattern. The path that it chooses in this unstable condition is unpredictable, spontaneous, presumably creative. It is here that the deterministic laws collapse. This is the solve and coagula, dissolve and bind of alchemy.
Yeah.
So that's what I was sharing, is that singularly every card represents just a specific thing if we're reading for ourselves to pay attention to, but it functions in conjunction with the other cards of the same suit, meaning that this is just an aspect of the process of transformation of the air element. So this is the card that I was mentioning it. This is the card of the spiritual adept who's working hard to detach from old inherent patterns that are running automatically inside our brain and we don't even know it. And that's where dreams that go directly from the unconscious and bring narrative in ways of metaphor for us to decipher, always bring forth the best, what is needed now. And most of the time, what it involves is clearing the space of old things in order to have enough space to receive the new that's trying so hard to come in. So what happens is in this kind of card, when this person is pulling in everything that's new, if this is, and they're relatively young and not, they haven't run the full circle of the Ouroboros, then because they still have, they're unaware of some of the patterns that are running them, they fluctuate back and forth. This is brilliant, but then the other things from the unconscious come up that they know nothing about. They don't have a rhyme on how to deal with that. They don't have the tools or the skills.
Right.
What are these shapes that are surrounding the figure, or well, the figures below and then the main prince figure? Do they have specific meanings?
Well, they probably do,
Mhm.
because it is the element of air and geometry and sacred geometry. All of these are abstract shapes of the
Right.
abstract thinking where creativity comes from that's not yet formed, but it's crystallized. So
Because the
I'm
one in the center looks like it's a representation of three-dimensionality.
yeah, that one they call the rhombus. So when but he, since it's below him, he doesn't quite have a good handle on
Oh,
it. So
right.
it's still running. It's still brilliant, like a little bit of a crystal. A
Mm,
crystal. He can see. There's the top and there's the bottom, but it's below him, and you see the little imps in front. I'll call them imps. I'm not sure. He does. He's looking down, trying to get them to obey, but they're kind of doing their, they're not quite um, all on board. The lucidity of the of the yellow and the abstract shapes, which is the brilliance that comes from the intellect, it's still struggling with the physical, using all the other uh, the heart, the earth, fire, in order to coagulate and make it concrete.
mhm,
He's still in the
right.
solve and coagulate is still not coagulated into form. So it's a bit chaotic. Skip likes chaos. This is a good one for him. You
Well,
see all those lines, but it's completely brilliant. It's full of the energy is very, very crystallized.
yeah.
Well,
Let's see.
if I did not know this deck, I would imagine that it had something to do with the pentacle suit because of the it's all gold and round
Mhm.
shape also.
The earthy
Yeah.
part, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there's some conversation going on here about what on YouTube now. There's some conversation about what we're really talking about and why we're talking about it. So what I want to do is address that for just a minute, which is that um, you know all of this, in my opinion, and based on long study of Jungian study, all of us need some sort of spiritual path. Okay, without identifying one specific one that is the right one, because the truth is there's no one spiritual path that's perfect for everyone today, and so Jungian writers like Thomas More, for example, has written a book called A Religion of Your Own. And that is to see where each one of you personally is in your lifetime, because by doing this study, you're taking yourself out of your day-to-day whatever is going on, which is always chaos, right? And it's letting you reset your mind in effect. And so when I'm reading a book, I typically underline that book because I'm drawing my own attention to something that I'm taking out of that book spiritually. And so the tarot is that kind of study. In other words, I can assure you that none of us know the end all be all answer of the tarot, okay, because it's it's a it's literally a living thing, and yet it's settled. I mean, in the Arabian sense, it is written basically what these cards mean, but you can study them as a spiritual exercise for the rest of your life, okay, and get deeper meaning from them. I guess that's the point I wanted to to make. So
I will also share that for those who perhaps want some crystallization is that there is an inner world that is completely alive, and a way to pay attention to that. The tarot is one of those ways. Everything is not out there, it is in here. And so inside, what skills, tools, or rituals that are available for the ones who wants to incorporate the two in order to become have the full capacity and the best steps they can take. They must address also the inner world, which is invisible otherwise. And this is a way of projecting it into a visible rendering, a shape, a story, a metaphor, a symbol, a trajectory of journeying. It's not only just one thing. It's it has many things, and it moves. It's the path of the journey of life. I call it the game of life. So it's
Right.
not that it's all out there. And so the tarot offers a portal for us to view, for us to go in there and mirror ourselves in all these
Yeah.
archetypes.
To reflect on our own lives. As you see, I
Mhm.
often come up with examples from my own life about things that happen, or especially in the Knight of Swords, for example.
And know that you're not alone. That
Right.
it's been going on for thousands of years
Precisely.
in the
precisely.
in the human life.
Right, in the human species. And so the point is that there's no one answer. And as Gertrude Stein said, there ain't no answer. There ain't going to be no answer. There never has been any answer. That's the answer. And so this is, the tarot is a way of picking up a card and entering into that portal, as Gilter rightly said, where you're considering what is going on in that portal and how it relates to your life. And if you do that, you will be enriched. And right. And fortunately, all of us feel enriched by what we know about the tarot. If we did this same class about the same cards next week, we'd probably say completely different things, right? And
I think that is the revelation. It's not only one wonders, well, how are we enriched? And it is because it's a revelation. It reveals to the person aspects
Sure.
of themselves that they cannot otherwise see. And it's since it's extremely creative because it's it's a cauldron that's all inclusive, symbol, images, sayings. It's got it all. It's so that's why it's such a rich, and it's got all kinds of people that have tried to give you a visual depiction from all sorts of walks of life, just like there are, I don't know how many deities in Buddhist pantheon. And I once asked one of the lamas, he said, well, there's many deities as there are personalities. So the symbolism and the narrative and the story, it's not set in stone.
No,
It's
not at
simply
all.
a container for us to jump in and see, oh, I have that too. When I
Yeah.
read that, I go, this is an aspect that
I
I
didn't
have.
understand about my own life, right?
Right. And how to harness it, how to know that it's okay that it's there now. There's a tool that one can utilize to mobilize it into a better place.
Yeah. So several of my YouTube subscribers who follow this channel seem to be getting into an off point argument among themselves. I don't know if it's an argument or just a discussion. I'm glad I can offer a forum for you to have your discussion, but guys, it's you're a little off point, I think, here. So I'd appreciate
What is it that they're
well, I'm not
interested-
even going to repeat it because it's long and complicated, and I would digress too much. But
Mm.
guys, we're talking about the Tarot here, so we're not talking about Ebola, nuclear war, or any other such thing per se. I mean, obviously they have some relevance, but let's try to keep it on topic. Is all I'm saying.
And what's
Um,
beautiful about it is that you can go as deep as a master can, and
Sure.
also you can be a novice that has just picked it up and it's newly discovering it.
Yeah.
So
And-
that's also beautiful.
And so, I'm not saying that the discussion is not a worthy topic. I'm only saying that maybe it's a topic for another day.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
And so I'm putting the Toth Prince of Swords back up because I'm going to read my version of this. You already read yours, right, Gilda?
Yeah, I have two books. I read one of them.
Okay,
So go ahead and read that
I
one.
guess I'm going to read the other one.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's see what
so-
it says.
So this is the Prince of Swords in the Toth deck. This card represents the airy part of air with its particular interpretation. It is intellectual. It is a picture of the mind as such. He rules from the 21st degree of Capricornus to the 20th degree of Aquarius. The figure of this prince is clothed with closely woven armor, adorned with definite device, and the chariot which bears him suggests even more closely geometrical patterns, ideas. This chariot is drawn by winged children looking and leaping irresponsibly in any direction that takes their fancy. They are not reined, but perfectly capricious. The chariot consequently is easy enough to move, but quite unable to progress in any definite direction except by accident. This is a perfect picture of the mind. All right, okay. On the head of this prince is nevertheless a child's head, radiant, for there is a secret crown in the nature of this card. If concentrated, it is exactly Tiferet. The operation of his logical mental processes have reduced the air, which is his element, to many diverse geometrical patterns, but in these there is no real plan. They are demonstrations of the powers of the mind without definite purpose. In his right hand is a lifted sword wherewith to create, but in his left hand a sickle, so that what he creates is instantly destroyed. He instantly destroys. A person thus symbolized as purely intellectual. He is full of ideas and designs which tumble over each other. He is a mass of fine ideals unrelated to practical effort. He has all the apparatus of thought in the highest degree, intensely clever, admirably rational, but unstable of purpose, and in reality indifferent even to his own ideas, as knowing that any one of them is just as good as any other. He reduces everything to unreality by removing its substance and transmuting it to an ideal world of ratiocination, which is purely formal and out of relation to any facts, even those upon which it is based. In the I Ching, the airy part of air is represented by the 57th hexagram, sun. This is one of the most difficult figures in the book on account of its ambivalence. It means both flexibility and penetration, immensely powerful because of its complete freedom from settled principles, capable of maintaining and putting forward any conceivable argument, insusceptible of regret or remorse, glib to quote scripture aptly and cunningly to support any thesis soever, indifferent to the fate of a contrary argument advanced 2 minutes earlier, impossible to defeat because any position is as good as any other, ready to enter into combination with the nearest element available. These elusive and elastic people are the value only when firmly mastered by creative will, fortified by an intelligence superior to their own. In practice, this is rarely possible. There is no purchase to be had upon them, not even by pandering to their appetites. These may nevertheless be stormy, even uncontrollable. Faddists, devotees of drink, drugs, humanitarianism, music, or religion are often in this class. But when this is the case, there is little or no stability. They wander from one cult to or one vice to another, always brilliantly supporting with the fanaticism of a fixed conviction what is actually no more than the whim of the moment. It is easy to be deceived by such people, for the manifestation itself has enormous potency. It is as if an imbecile offered one of the dialogues of Plato. They may in this way acquire a great reputation for both depth and breadth of mind. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, that was pretty. That was closer to what Raquel mentioned. That there's a certain, I think, the dark aspect of it. But in this book, which is the other one written about these cards, there's a very different explanation.
Okay.
If you want me to,
It
says the Prince of Sword wears tight webbed green armor. He is a master of creative ideas, thinking and planning. A prerequisite for being able to think creatively is unrestricted freedom. The creative thought process cannot tolerate being limited in any way. This is why the prince swings his arms so far back to cut the connections with the figures pulling the wagon with full force. These figures are symbols of confining ideas and feelings or limited relationships, which might slow the chariot's progress. The crystal in the chariot is shaped like a double pyramid, which Annabelle wanted to know. It shows perception becoming crystallized. This is a good time to give shape and form to ideas. Sometimes problems appear insurmountable to us because of old limiting belief systems and convictions. For example, I am weak and dependent, or if I assert myself, I will be punished, or I am basically clumsy. In some past situation, perhaps in our childhood, such feelings may have had a certain validity, but now they have no relation to our present reality. We continue to drag these beliefs along with us, however, repeatedly experiencing situations which reinforce them. Well, tell ourselves, for example, that our basic clumsiness causes us to drop and break things. Reality is just a little different. We don't simply fall into situations accidentally, but create them around ourselves based on our beliefs about reality. A man who is embarrassed about his terrible clumsiness, for example, will so restrict his movements, afraid of being clumsy, that his movements really will be clumsy. Whatever true natural grace he may possess remains undiscovered and undeveloped because at some time in the past, someone convinced him to see himself as clumsy. If we closely examine aspects of ourselves which are unsatisfactory, we can see that each uncomfortable and unworkable situation serves to show us our own misconceptions and mistaken attitudes. once we have seen these for what they are, we can correct and let go of them. And this is what this very dynamic figure does.
So Annabelle, do you have some thoughts here? No?
Really on this card, no.
Okay. Raquel, anything else?
I think it's all about, I think it really is a very dynamic image and figure, but it kind of doesn't have a purpose.
Yeah, I think of the
know?
quote, "Youth will be served often on silver platters."
Yeah,
Right.
it's pretty dynamic, and I think that everything that Gilda just said with that last book, it was just misconceptions, you know, and sometimes we think that severing cords or just ending relationships will, you know, solve all our problems, but probably not. It's just going to enhance
Oh,
them.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Definitely not. I mean,
But when it's taken in, when it's, you know, there's always the outer and the inner. So the fact that we attract that relationship that's not working
Yeah.
is because of an inner pattern that we haven't let go that's not working. So somehow that pattern needs to be cut and severed in order to make
right.
the space for us to be able to change the relationship. So in that sense, I think that might be what this asks. Some books are more directed towards the source of the problem, which is in a belief system, and
Yeah.
then address the outer situation versus the other way around. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
it works
Well,
both ways.
we,
Without the
we would-
inner working, you will continue to have problems with a relationship no matter what.
we would be much better served if we educated young people about these ideas.
Mhm.
And instead of making them think that, wow, if you just learn a few facts and a few skills, you're going to walk on water. Maybe you're not going to walk on water, and maybe you need to, you know, chill
Learn
a
how
little
to
bit,
swim.
right? And there's this verse from the Old Testament that I think is apropos. Let me see if I can find it quickly. I know I can because I often refer to it. But it's from Ecclesiastes 1:18. So it says, in much wisdom is much grief, and in he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. And
That's that. Because inwardly, when you have wisdom, you realize that the things that you were grabbing onto that once served you, now they need to be let go.
Yeah.
And that's very painful because they have served one in the past
right.
again and again, but they're no longer functioning. And to be able to even see it, that is there as a pattern automatic running, that's where I think if young people start early, being instructed also in seeing their invisible world inside, which runs them half of the time, you know, runs most people, old, young, whatever. It was created early in life.
Right.
That's where dreams and individuation are that dreams and individuation address precisely that.
Okay, well, I'm a bit breathless, I have to tell you. I've been, in addition to my usual schedule that was already busy. I'm doing a lot of running around to doctors these days.
Mm.
And so I'm gonna.
So would you be taking some time off to rest and all of that sometime
I'm
soon?
hoping not, Gilda.
Oh.
I don't know. If I'm able to do a decent job, I may have to just come and turn on the session each week and let you guys go forth. But I'm hoping at least in the beginning of this radiation, it takes a while for it to start causing you to be tired. I think each radiation shot is like 13 seconds or something like that. So each one isn't going to do that much, but since I have to have 43 and 43 consecutive business days, I'm sure it piles up. And so
do you have a holistic doctor to help your immune system be up and vibrant during this time?
well, I have my wife, and that's one.
Oh, good.
And she is making me see a palliative care doctor. And where I live, the palliative care doctor makes house calls.
What's a palliative health?
Palliative care means, helping you cope with, especially with pain. And, I have a couple of issues here, which is I need a hip replacement, and my hip has no cartilage in it. So when I walk across the room, it goes and that can be quite painful. And so that's very tiring. And but the problem, I got myself in a problem where you can get a cortisone shot in your hip, which solves the problem more or less for 90 days. And you can't have your hip replaced while you're under the cortisone shot. So in January, I had the shot, and the idea was that I was going to have my hip replaced last Thursday, on the 6th of May, or a week ago Thursday. And but when I got the cancer diagnosis, then I have to put off the hip replacement. And so that means now I have to go through a whole summer of radiation, and then I have to wait 30 days after that before I can get my hip replaced. And so anyway, how to juggle the pain and get some sleep is a bit of an issue. But I mean, it's not insurmountable. I don't think I'm going to die from prostate cancer, and but I'm going to have a challenging rest of 2021. So I'm looking forward to 2022. This is why I'm planning conferences for 2022, because I'm going to be busy, and I think I am going to be tired. It is quite tiring, and I haven't been able to sleep in my bed in a couple of weeks. So fortunately, we did get some new Lazy Boy furniture, which works out pretty well for me. So other than the fact that it eats my AirPods and so on. Oh, geez.
We'll send you some links that may be helpful for you.
Okay, that would be great.
Look them up.
So the secret of life is that when we become a mature adult, what we've become is a problem solver, and we solve problems 7 by 24 by 365, or at least I like your cat, Erica. And we're solving problems constantly, and that's what a mature human being does. And so we're prepared to do that. And part of the idea of this class that we're doing in great detail on the tarot is that it gives you a little insight into, well, if this problem comes up, maybe I ought to do this, and so on. So
It's to your empowerment.
your empowerment,
It's
absolutely,
to their empowerment.
absolutely. And so anyway, so peace, everyone. We'll see you next week, or we'll see you in the advanced reading group on Wednesday. Take care.
Good night,
Absolutely.
Thanks,
everybody.
Skip. Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
And good night, Raquel. Thank you for being here. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.